Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I'm really excited to go in and presenting the this webinar on decommissioning. I am Nigel Blumire. I'm the chair of the Hazardous Industries Group, and we go and look at, we're mainly dedicated towards the hazardous industries, but we also go and cover a lot of areas from regulator to going and having people from environmental and other things like that. So in this particular talk, we'll be going into how decommissioning can be done safely, and really is a really important topic for health and safety professionals, because we're going and trying to take something from an operational state where we know what the risks are, we know what the hazards are, and we're trying to go and bring it to a safe state where it can go and be almost parked, ready to go and be demolished, and taken out of service completely in a few years' time. So Richard will be giving some real-world examples and lessons learned from large-scale projects from his vast expertise. Many of these concepts can be extrapolated to other projects, whether they're big or small, and I hope that all attendees go and gain some insights into this topic. Just as a reminder, we will do a Q&A session at the end, and if you can go and put your questions in the Q&A tab, that'll be much appreciated, and we'll go through those in the last 10-15 minutes, and I will ask Richard those questions. So, introductions for Richard. Richard went and started at the Ford Motor Company and spent 26 years. He started off as an engineer in 1994 and ended his time there as the manufacturing manager. He moved to Tata Steel in 2020 and is now the asset management lead at Tata Steel Europe. So I'm really pleased to go and have Richard here going and providing this webinar. So thank you, Richard, and over to you with your talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nigel, and thank you to IOSH for giving us the opportunity to present. I'm really pleased to be representing Tata and representing the decommissioning teams, really to be able to take everyone through what has been quite an undertaking, but a very successful cessation of our assets, really. So there's been a sort of few times in my career where I've been involved in major projects, and it's not just the metrics that indicate that you're doing a good job, but it's a sense of sort of a feeling of pride amongst the team, and the fact you're doing the right thing. So the process that we put together and that all the decommissioning teams have sort of followed through with to a very safe decommissioning of our assets has been a massive team effort. And lots of people involved in many different capacities. So today I can only really give my account, if you like, but I'll take you through the process that was developed and the successes that we've had. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, that's it. This is our decommissioning sort of logo. We wanted to put a brand behind it and recognize the terminology as well, so that we were all talking about the same thing. So we split decommissioning into cessation, make safe, and then keep safe phases. Okay, so for the agenda, we'll go through the decommissioning framework, the hazard study processes, isolation procedures, a bit about how we manage the environmental protection and hazardous materials, and then how we governed the project. So just going through the decommissioning framework, we made a start probably back in September 2023. Business understood that as part of a future transformation at the time, that we would be needing to decommission assets. So it was a sensitive time around the company, and there was still a lot of options on the table. But the company knew that we'd need to understand how we decommissioned. So myself and one of the colleagues in business office undertook sort of an investigation in terms of what we had around processes and standards for decommission, and it turns out there was very little. Really, we had a site closure check sheet, which was written by the property department, and that was about it really in terms of a process. So we set about trying to understand what other information there was in industry. And one of the first things we looked at is previous incidents. And this slide is one of the slides that we'd used as an opening slide, really, in a lot of the training sessions and the communications that we had then with the team. So if we don't do this properly, then things go properly wrong. As you can see from a fatality in Redcar, where they'd ceased assets 4 years prior to some work undertaken. So we sort of got the sense that we needed to do the due diligence. We needed to do this and come up with a very robust process and do it properly, because we wouldn't want any incidents such as this. So fatalities have occurred in the industry, and where there may have been flammable materials remaining in cut pipe work, that clearly wasn't either known or documented or risk assessed when the work was undertaken. So hence, we knew we needed a robust process. We also, looking through the press, could see that there were also fatalities with trespassers onto decommissioned sites, where it was sort of copper theft. But again, there was a high risk from trespassers, and there's a duty of care to ensure we highlight, contain, or remove hazards and mitigate any risks, really. And we certainly need to show that we've gone as far as is reasonably practicable to prevent that, but also as a business risk from theft as well. We do have some areas which have been decommissioned, which are mothballed, which means that they'll be maintained with a view of bringing them back into operation in 2 or 3 years' time. So again, there's certainly a risk around those areas where we have to ensure security as well. So internally in Tata, we set about, well, we've decommissioned assets before. There was very little digitally in the way of records or documents. So the filing cabinet you see there on the right was in a room in Llanwern. There were 70 box files in total just for the coke ovens there. And we could see exactly some of the detail that they'd got into, minutes of meetings, to see exactly how they had decommissioned those assets there. We also had similar files for the remaining heavy in Llanwern, but also in other parts of the business or around the UK from previous demolitions, around Orb, Ebbw Vale, Ravenscraig. So we had a lot of documentation brought back, which could help us sort of reverse engineer the process, if you like. So we could see a lot of similarities, but also differences, and wanted to take the best practice from what we could see in those files. We also looked at any relevant legislation and CDM, site closure checklist, and we also spoke to any people that was left in the business that was available from the documentation that we had. A small team of us then also went to Scunthorpe to visit their Appleby coke ovens, where they probably were maybe 9 to 12 months after ceasing, they could give us some of their learnings as well that we could introduce into the process that we're going to put together. We also knew that there was going to be a wide range of different types of assets, a wide range of teams involved. So this is within Port Talbot, and we knew that all of these areas listed here would be involved in some capacity to decommission. So we needed a process that was flexible as well as robust to be able to deal with all different types of assets, all different types of hazards, which varied massively across the sites. In total, in the end, about 150 people were directly employed in decommissioning teams, 7 in total, and over 250,000 labour hours have been spent over the last sort of 14 to 15 months. So this was the main summary of our decommissioning phases. So phase 1, we termed cessation, and this is a lot of the planning stages. We're doing hazard studies, we're drawing down raw materials, we're stopping production, and we're achieving the initial plant status. Then in the second phase, that's where we purge, isolate, remove energy, remove hazardous waste, remove materials. That's where we're actually severing the the systems, the pipework, the cables, and providing those permanent isolations. One of the key things we wanted to make sure is that all was documented in a structured way, and again consistent across the 7 areas, so that those assets are handed over then to a keep safe or team, or some assets are handed over to the project team as it is now for electric arc. Other assets are being handed over to our central keep safe team to look after them in their stable state. So these were the main phases. We wanted to make sure everybody understood what these phases were, because a lot of people were throwing words around at the time. What's the difference between decommissioning, demolition, what's mothballing, cessation? So it's trying to get everyone on the same page and understanding. And one of the key things that is written out there when we went looking, and one of the key requirements from the HSE is that initial planning and making safe has to be undertaken by people who are familiar with the area. So it was the works areas that we would be asking to generate a decommissioning team in each area. So each area had a decommissioning manager, which came from within that area, and all of the people within that team were also familiar and generally from those areas from when it was operating. As I said, there's a keep safe team now, but throughout it all, we provide sort of central governance and support, as in the framework, the processes, but also how we sort of manage to try and keep each of the areas together to learn from each other and work together. So that again is probably one of the key slides that we've used in some of the communications with the teams. This can be further broken down on the left-hand side. You could see that we've got to understand the scope. So you've got to try and start with the end in mind. We need to know what the sort of what condition the assets are going to need to be in. What are they going to be mothballed? Are they going to be demolished? Are they going to be handed over to project teams? And that makes a difference then in terms of how you plan to conduct isolations and what actions to undertake. So a lot of the blue activities then around planning, everything. So we had a plan in stage 1 and 2. So some of these are further broken out into more detailed steps. Then we need to ensure that all of the teams are inducted properly, understand all the requirements from a safety aspect, but also the framework. And then achieving plant status. Then we go into make safe, achieving the isolations, doing the cleaning, dismantling, removal activities, and then ensuring that we've got it all documented, ready for handover. So the timeline is a sort of a minimum timeline. A couple of the areas, maybe at least less complex, have probably delivered it within this timeline. Other areas have probably taken twice this length because of the detail and the complexity that we've had to go into to decommission. So before I go any further, I just wanted to try and convey the size and the scale and the people that were involved. This video was taken just at the start. So Moa Coke Ovens was our first asset which came offline. So this was taken probably about a week and a half after that asset ceased. So right at the start of the make safe phase then, if you like.
My name is Matthew Frey. I've worked in Moa Coke Ovens for 20 years and my role today is shutdown coordinator to bring this plant to a safe and stable cessation or stop. The role of the shutdown coordinator really is to coordinate everything of the every phase of the shutdown. So there's 3 phases with multiple stages in each phase. Every phase of that shutdown goes through the shutdown coordinator. Every action, every every bit of feedback, everything of this process has come through myself, through this control centre, and then I've addressed it from there. We've documented it and controlled it really. In this process, roles and responsibilities is really important. For that, we took the roles and responsibilities identified within our LEP, Local Emergency Plan, took the key elements of those roles and made them retrofit into this process. Main reasons for that is we run it like we would run an emergency, but in a controlled and safe manner to bring this plant to a safe cessation.
We were fetched together as a team for decommissioning a few months ago, and over those last few months we've been carrying out HS1 and HS2 studies. So we've broke the plant down into smaller chunks as it would be, and then we've worked through each node for the HS2s, identifying all the risks that are out there. So from the HS2s, we've developed the procedure to take the plant down safely. In that HS2 team, we've had a large amount of people from all different functions who then give us a rounded view of every aspect of decommissioning, from our environmental department, process safety, health, operations, mechanical, electrical, and our OEM partners as well.
Part of my role obviously within this decommission team was on the days as the scribe for Matthew and the team. So everything that, any deviations, every step, every minute, every person has been documented on sort of slides. So every phase, anything and everything that's happened has been documented, down to plans, next steps. But what we also done was we created, at the end of each day, we created an action list based off the steps of the day, which allowed us then to feed into the night shift of any actions that was ongoing, and just kept the process smooth and efficient and running where it should be.
My role in the decommissioning and mobile coke ovens has probably been a little bit more on the facilitation side and kind of the organisation side. So we set up a lot of controls around gas monitors, CF15s, radios. Also we use the roll call system to log where everyone is at all times, so you know when people are in and out of different areas. We've also had a little bit of involvement around where all the machines are positioned, put the plans together, our isolation plans, making sure that's all captured electrically, drained down, and from a pressure side of things. So that's been my involvement. I've just been here to support the team really, and it's been great to see the level of control, and everything has come through the control centre through our shutdown coordinator.
So this entire process started with a Hazard Study 1 and Hazard Study 2 process. There's been a few months build up into this, working in close conjunction with our OEM, OSL, and that's given us a really good grounding really of understanding, learning from previous events, because they've shut multiple plants down, or coke plants down within the UK. We identified our own hazards. Some of the OSL team also stayed here, worked here for some time, so they understood the plant as it runs, and we had a multi-functional team really from all the coke ovens who sat in there to build the procedures.
So we've gone through some tough times over the last year, as everybody is aware. We started making a couple of changes, I would say probably around a month ago to 3 weeks ago. So there was a lot of work done at the start, probably 30 to 40% of the long-term ovens then that were out of service. We carried that on into last week as well, and obviously that continued then onto Monday for the go, no-go of the shutdown. And there was a lot of good work done with the last remaining ovens into service then on the Tuesday, and then that has continued then throughout the middle of this week then, so that we were in the safest possible position then to take it down safely.
Okay, quite a poignant sort of video really as well, because it sort of reminds at the time, you know, the sort of journey that the company and all the people that have spent so many years running the place sort of had to go through. But I think, you know, everybody took it upon themselves to do it with pride and professionalism, and to follow the process and make sure that nobody got harmed. So I think that was very well done. I think the video might play again. No, here we go. Okay, so our decommissioning framework, so all of the process that we put together, we've actually documented into a framework standard, which we've published, and certainly through the initial stages of decommissioning, as we were learning and gaining information, we were making updates to that. So the team and the members of the teams had access to the master copy, so they could always rely on the right data. And as we were finding more information, people were asking questions, we were realizing we had to find answers to them. When we found them, we'd include them into the framework so that they were there for future or for other teams to call upon. So this these headings along the top of what was a tracker, if you like, laid out the process. It tended to be from left to right. The teams could list their areas on the left-hand side and even populate these trackers with actual and planned and actual dates. So it took them right from the start of generating the plant item list and the scope into the sort of preparation activities for their first hazard study, then into some reviews around the checklists, identifying safe working procedures, assessing hazards in more detail through the second hazard study process, and then coming up with a list of isolations. So the initial planning was quite a very robust, sort of intensive process of understanding information, making decisions, and coming up with the actions that will be required. So then the isolations, I&I procedures had to be written or reviewed for their purpose, detailed planning, and then the use of our management of change to document the decisions that had been made and the method that we were intending to cease the operations, and that was approved through management of change. And then we were into the execution, running down materials, putting it into the initial plant status, and then going through the make safe process. So again, each of the steps was broken down so that the teams knew exactly what order to do things, and everyone did things in a consistent way. Also within the framework, we had 31 framework plans, see various subjects, because what we also needed to ensure was that the teams could work efficiently. So we didn't want different teams all sitting down, starting from a blank sheet of paper, working out all the same, asking all the same questions and coming up largely with a lot of the same answers, or having to go around a lot of different standards or making contact with different people to understand what the requirements were. So these requirements, each of the different subjects had a subject matter expert assigned to them who would generally write what the requirements were. We got together in groups to confirm that those statements were correct and that they'd be supported by the business in terms of what we wanted to achieve. And then as each decommissioning team was formed, there were members of each team assigned to each of the framework plans. So they could meet, if you like, as communities to again share some knowledge and discuss each of the different elements amongst each other and how they can interpret it into their own areas. So hazard study process was key, and I think it was the Scunthorpe visit really. One of the learnings from there was that the actions that they came up with up in Scunthorpe, when they had an early intervention with the HSE, it was clear that they wanted to understand how those actions were risk assessed and generated. So that was the feedback from Scunthorpe. And when we sort of reflected on that, it was decided to try and use the hazard study process, which is normally run as part of our CapEx project for new installations. Okay, so what we did for hazard study 1, we had to tailor the report there and the template for it. And one of the key things that we did was we added actions into each of the sections, and there were 42 standard actions listed. So that, because again, we knew that there were a number of things that each decommissioning team would have to go through, and without wanting each team to either miss any of those things or to have to spend the time to come up with those actions, we listed those in the hazard study. So it was clear where the actions were generated within the hazard study, and they could be listed at the end. So additional actions, obviously, for each area then could come out of that hazard study. But this is where all of the different hazards would be identified. In hazard study 2, this is where the areas were split up into modules and nodes, and risk assessed essentially against the guide words in the risk assessment. And again, to tailor it for decommissioning, we added some additional guide words into there so that some additional specifics for decommissioning were considered. We also wanted to make sure the robustness of it, that we had a sign-off process. So we had our process safety, occupational safety, and environmental teams. So every hazard study report not only would be attended anyway by representatives of those teams, but the reports would be scrutinised using a set of a checklist or a set of questions in the review form, and then approval would be given then by those departments for the final sign-off. And we also had the decommissioning standard to back up as reference. So in total across the heavy end, 37 HS1s, 61 HS2s were conducted, 250 assets, 1,400 nodes, and over 5,000 hazard study actions were identified by the 7 teams, really. So it's quite a time-consuming process, but one that I think everyone involved agreed was necessary and give us the confidence that what we were doing was going to be robust, and to make sure we did things safely. We had mandatory attendees for hazard studies as well, so we and a central governance amongst process safety, occ safety, and the environmental, especially those teams that were reviewing. They were feeding back information as well, and so that we made future hazard studies more effective and robust, so that, you know, by the end of it, there were very little points to pick up on by the reviewing teams, because we were taking those lessons and taking them into other hazard studies. So we also had interdependent works areas such as energy, where there were some unknowns within the networks, or some like I say, interdependent works areas. So again, there was some cross collaboration amongst the teams, which was really good to see. So just taking an example, this is one, so this is the blast furnace 5 area. So there were 4 modules, 44 nodes. So one hazard study 1 covering that area. So that hazard study went through its review process, identified all the required hazards. So then that was broken down then into 4 hazard study 2s. And for each of those hazard study 2s, you can see the amount of nodes, 9 or 10 generally, or 17 in case of the cooling water. So each one of those, there were 4 hazard study 2 reports, and each one of the nodes, you can see in the Excel chart on the right, were risk assessed. You can see the details that were gone into schematic diagrams or whatever of the systems themselves, and working out the best methods of isolation, the most robust means, and what actions were required to control all of the hazards. Again, that was signed off through a document review process there. So this is the hazard study 1 in itself, sort of 135 pages, almost 40,000 words, and they had 12 additional actions on top of the 42. Just for one of the hazard study 2 reports, as you can see, 120 pages, 13,000 words, and 95 actions came out of that one there. So again, you can see the effort and the scrutiny that's gone into making sure that we've identified everything we could to make sure we had a safe decommissioning. Those actions then were put into action trackers, and you can see that the list, we can reference the source, which has a study they came from, what the action number is. You can trace them back to exactly where within the reports they are. You can see if they're A actions, which were the standard 42, or if they're additional actions that the teams came up with specific to each of the assets. And then we can track them to completion, and the evidence for those actions as well then was also given on the slide with the action review sheet there. You can see. Again, just where it fits the hazard study process is around the discovery, making sure the hazards are known and that we know how to, we can understand what can go wrong and how do we control it. Obviously, we need to conduct the hazard study actions, issue the permits, procedures and permits, and then to ensure we prevent people, environment and assets getting hurt, really. So we had to ensure we had the right hazards, we were controlling the right risks, and that we confirmed and verified all of the procedures. So it was a very robust process. Going on to the isolation procedures. So one person, one lock standard was to be followed. This is now mandatory anyway across the UK, but at the time there were still some of the areas and a couple which were being decommissioned which hadn't introduced the latest standard around isolation. But as a decommissioning team, we wanted to ensure that we were using the most robust methods, and we insisted that these were going to be done, which required a new way of working to some of the teams and the latest procedure forms to be used, which ensured they were the most robust procedures we could come up with. They should be documented, all mechanical fluid power isolations to follow mechanical safety rules, intended to create a line of sight in isolations to ensure the supply cannot be reinstated, so cutting pipes, planking, cut cables post-isolation in a way to ensure the supply cannot be reinstated without a redesign as well. And then we also developed decommissioning certificates, which required all permanent isolations to the isolation authority, and it allowed us to remove the permits then once the units were permanently disabled. So this was our one person, one lock process, which we amended at the bottom there to sort of highlight the steps required to decommission to allow us to remove the permit from the permit office. These were the performers used. And these were the certificates that would verify that the asset was permanently disabled to allow the isolation permit to be taken away. And we also wanted to ensure that we had visual markings on the assets out on site. So a decommission label was also developed and applied. This is an example of a decommissioned node. Some pages will be removed from the example, but you can see the certificate, the authorization to decommission, what they were about to undertake, the procedure form that was used, the level of detail that with photographs, locations. You can see the sign-offs, so the approval and the verification. You can see the permits that were used to conduct the work, and then the evidence then taken afterwards with labels applied. So again, there's 1,660 isolations conducted across the patch. And some examples of how we control various hazards then, obviously with electricity, cutting cables we've mentioned. A lot of motive power was eliminated as well through disconnecting sort of conveyor chains, couplings. Tension rods and dead weight ropes, sort of eliminating stored energy. Removal of assets, so the photo there is of the cog main and the coke ovens, which certain assets posed structural risks. So some minor demolition then has been done in those cases. Filling of pond sumps, slag runners, so eliminating fall from height risks. Again, thinking a lot about intruders as well. but just generally dangers in the area for people that may be in there inspecting or surveying in the future. And again, pipes cut and blanked with line of sight, eliminating their unintentional use or any risk of there being repressurization or use of those pipelines. Some examples of where, from a safety and security, did a lot of removing access, removing height, access to height as well with stairwells. Certain stairwells were removed completely, but others where they were still needed for future access were caged as per the photo. We've installed over 13 kilometres of fence line at the start of the decommissioning process to make sure each of the assets could go into the CDM sort of phase. 10 kilometres of that was on our site boundary, if you like, which has also always really been open along the beach side in particular. And then the other 4 kilometres around some of the assets internally within the site. And finally, from a security point of view, we've in the last few months installed some sort of AI-enabled mobile security pods, which can detect intruders, allow security to talk to them directly over the tannoys. And these pods are quite intelligent, can have various sensors applied to them. And like I say, artificial intelligence as well. So we're starting to gain more understanding of the capabilities of those systems have got. A few slides now around the environmental protection and hazardous waste. But this sort of showcases as well maybe some of the benefits that we had with the framework. So this slide here shows within the decommissioning standard the environmental and a couple of associated plans, and you can sort of see the, you know, not a huge amount of detail in all cases, but some of the key things that we'd want to make sure people knew that they had to achieve, links to various checklists or fact sheets and things like that, so people didn't have to go delving through a lot of standards or again, you know, to find the basic of what needs to be achieved against each of the elements, really. So it gives some very good direction, sort of hands-on information to the team to quickly get hold of the key information. We also had waste management plans, so hazardous waste was within this, and again links to consignment notes, transfer notes, looking at the inventory masters and looking at the checklists that had to be populated by the teams. Whether it be hazardous waste or other waste, all waste, I suppose, was treated with the same sort of hierarchy in terms of what the most preferred and least preferred method of how it's managed, if you like, with prevention or reuse at the top and disposal, the least preferred method. So it was fair to say, I suppose, there was a number of decommissioning framework elements on the left-hand side that you could see that all sort of blended together, if you like, from a waste removal point of view. There were a number of key stakeholders as well that looked across those framework plans. And because of that, a material or waste value management committee was set up to go through the governance and handle the waste in the same way. So this just shows the process. There was a request form where the template and the checklist was included in standard, so that the area would populate what the waste was, the quantities and the basic information. And then this request would be reviewed by the central team and plans put in place then to dispose or manage that waste in the best way possible. Also controlling the release of funds as well and the recovery of funds. So again, various statements that were within these, the framework around this was that all COSH items should be identified and reviewed during hazard study 1 and 2. The key material should follow the request form. Key consideration to mitigate reduced waste disposal to landfill or incineration wherever practicable. So all hazardous material should be removed, and where accessible it should be cleaned to reduce associated risk. So again, many of our silos, bunkers, wind mains, all emptied and cleaned as per the framework requirements, really. Oils, greases, chemicals should, where possible, be drained down in storage facilities such as tanks and pipework emptied. And then since the decommissioning, we have had to resubmit our COMA report as well, where a lot of these, the hazard profile has changed now as a site, and the documentation of what's been done to manage those hazards has been updated by the teams. In terms of governance and handover then, a couple of photographs here. A number of sort of town hall or larger events were conducted with the decommissioning teams as they were coming on board to take them through the process, make sure everyone's aware of the severity of not doing this right in terms of the fatalities that I showed at the start. And one of the key things that we did have was that support from above, really, which was key. So the guy in the photo there presenting is Richard Sims, who's our engineering director, and he was very key in making sure that the message got across and that we did this in a structured way and a safe way. Also smaller sort of classroom sessions with smaller groups of people. In this case, this was a photograph from the early intervention with the CA. Again, you can see Richard Sims taking a lead role in making sure that we knew the business was serious about doing this the right way. And again, this is one of the hazard study sessions. So again, a lot of hours spent as teams cross-functionally sort of working together, which was really good to see. This slide is a bit busy, but it tries, if I start at the top left, this is right at the start of researching and developing the framework. This is where we conducted a lot of workshops then with the teams as they were coming on board. You can see the timeline really of the cessation and make safe phases. You can see the areas conducting the hazard studies, hazard study 1 and 2s with central support teams. Part of those hazard studies were also doing the reviews. Verification, we had the management of change there for approval prior to execution, where a lot of the I&I procedures then were being reviewed. A lot of safe working procedures, there were local lead safes. And then as the isolations were conducted and the assets were decommissioned, the certificates and the documentation and the evidence was all compiled into the handover file. Centrally, there were also each of the functional heads were together with the central engineering teams. We were conducting various audits, again learning and sharing between the areas some of the different risks or good practices that we'd seen. There was a daily, so DSUM is a daily stand-up meeting, WSUM a weekly meeting. So we had a 2-hour face-to-face meeting on a Friday morning with each of the decommissioning managers and all of the functional leads, where each area presented on a flash report the key activities that week, next week, and also any escalations or concerns or things to learn. We also had monthly workshops where, again, wider stakeholders could join in to understand the progress that was being made by the teams, and we picked some sort of pertinent subjects each month to go through with some of the subject matter experts from the framework plans. We also had a learning from event session after the co-governance ceased to understand then some of the changes that can be taken forward. And I think a lot of learnings around the human factors element was then added to the framework to ensure that was conducted more thoroughly through the remaining areas that were being decommissioned. So I mentioned a handover file. So again, we wanted to make sure there was consistency in that. So a handover file structure was generated for use by each of the areas, which also had the feed in from the framework plans there and sort of complemented how the process of decommissioning worked. The top 4 files together, so we had the handover certificate, the decommissioning statement, a list of remaining hazards, and then the index then, so that anyone receiving the file could understand exactly where to get information from. You can see on the right-hand side in file 14, then that's where each of the areas would store the information related to each of the assets in terms of how they were decommissioned and all the permits and the evidence and the procedures that were used. So the top 4 together with the marked up site views essentially makes up our health and safety file as a result of the project, and then that may go on and become the sort of pre-construction information for future activity in that area. So again, the handovers, the certificates were formed with a session where the decommissioning area would make sure, together with the keep safe area, that what was being handed over, we knew exactly what the status of it was, and agreed the remaining hazards or any outstanding actions prior to handover. And then when that was agreed, then obviously the signatures were undertaken, and then that area was handed over to the keep safe teams. So just to try and a couple of slides to finish off really, we did unfortunately have one recordable accident, but it was still a minor case really. The injured party sort of was working to cut cables and had a cable cut. He was working underneath, if you like, and did have a small cut to his head there. So there were learnings from that, and it just goes to show the level of detail that we need to be at to sort of prevent all sort of harm to everyone. But we've still suggested as a success in terms of the metrics as well, with a case rate there of about 0.8, with about 250,000 hours worked. The industry average is around between 2 to 4. But again, this shows, and you can see the graphs there, that our safety reporting system, as soon as the area ceased production, they were all put into a decommissioned team, so we could understand what was happening across each of the areas. And a lot of good work was being done, with over 1,500 inspections conducted and lead safes, 200 odd improvement actions, 520 proactive safety behaviours, and various other near misses and improvement actions that we've all sort of learned from, and just show how in control we felt as decommissioning teams, and if you like, that we could react and support and quickly close down any concerns. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour through our decommissioning process, and thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to taking any questions.
Thank you very much, Richard. I think that was that showed just the amount of work it takes to go and decommission a major piece of infrastructure. So a lot of hours by a lot of dedicated people. So congratulations on doing that. We've got some really good questions. I'm not sure we're going to get through every single one, but we'll see how we go. What we will do is anything we don't get to, we'll go and pose to Richard, and then we'll go and put up on our LinkedIn so that the answers are there. Okay. So I also wanted to go and say, for those who are outside the UK, COMA is the Control of Major Accidents and Hazards Regulations. In Europe, it's called Seveso. I'm sure in other countries you have your own ones as well, but just so that people are aware of what COMA actually is and what we're actually doing with that one. Okay. So I think this is a really important one to start with, because you've gone and got quite you've got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge already at the plant as you were starting the decommissioning program. How did you go and retain safety critical personnel to go and actually do that decommissioning?
I think we were fortunate in that up front we could see early on, probably 3 to 6 months then before we needed to cease any of these assets, that we needed to get people on board, and we knew the planning phase was going to take some time. So we actually developed the decommissioning teams probably about 6 months before any cessation. So although the coke ovens went off at the end of February, the other blast furnaces and other areas didn't go off until the end of September, yet all of the decommissioning teams were really together from January 2024. So what the teams had to do, and it was very difficult at the time because they were trying to run the operations as well. Obviously, they were aged assets. They were coming towards their end of life. There were announcements being made by the business, so it was difficult. But the business did commit to ensuring that people were assigned to this. So it was a very big commitment from the business, but also the teams themselves to run those facilities light in some cases with limited resource so that we could resource this. So the teams were on board quite a way before the actual assets were taken down.
Yeah, I think that leads into the two questions are very similar. Because you're going through that process of shutting down assets, and you've got a lot of employees that you're dealing with. Did you have to go and deal with any of the mental health side of things? Was that something that cropped up within the process at all?
I mean, there were campaigns around mental health, and there was a specific, the mental health department then were running a lot of campaigns at the time. What it did more directly around decommissioning was, and I mentioned that we had the learning from events from the Morva coke ovens, was that we probably hadn't put enough emphasis in the initial framework around human factors and control of people in the area, making sure everyone knew exactly what they were going to be doing or if they weren't going to be doing anything, and the importance of working together, but not because some people, if they weren't directly involved on any particular day, could also become a hazard as well within the areas or a disturbance. So I think it sort of did focus on, we had then a number of sessions where we went through human factors. How are we going to do shift changeovers, hand information over between parties, looking after the kit at critical times, and I'd say the coke ovens and blast furnaces in particular, they were the ones from a process safety point of view were critical for 24, 48 hours certainly, at least probably then a week or so afterwards. It was a 24/7 operation really, so the teams were working some long hours but supporting each other as well. So yeah, there were definitely then more emphasis put on that after the initial cessation.
All right, thank you very much for that one. There is another good question here. It might sort of lead off from that as well. What were the main challenges that you encountered as a team during the decommissioning project?
I think the main challenges we anticipated then was how are we going to keep people engaged and to make sure they were going to do the right thing, considering they were working in areas that were shutting down. But also, how do we get so many different people from different functions? There were so many elements to this. How do we actually get people to all work together? And maybe in a strange way, some of us as functions, we probably we've worked better together now as a result of decommissioning than we ever have even during the life of some of the assets. So I think that's what we expected to be the biggest challenge. And I think that's one of the biggest successes of what we have done is the working together that we have got now, the collaboration, across departments and across functions, really, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the very important part, getting the collaboration working and getting those cross-party elements going. So thank you for that. With the handover, I saw that you were signing off handover between the various teams. One of the questions was, Was there a simple system of approval? So green means approved, instead of having to check documents specifically, going through all of those pages. There was a lot of pages to look
Yeah.
into. Was there a simple way of handover?
There was. We had a handover checklist, which was used in the handover event, then, if you like, so that we could see from each of the decommission frameworks. We had a red, amber, green status on it, any outstanding actions. So yeah, a checklist was used for that purpose.
Good, good. I think that leads into another question where it's sort of, yes, a red, amber, green process was used to actually go and quickly see what needs doing.
Yeah, we had various sections, so each of the frameworks, but we also had the documentation, for example, you know, and we also reviewed during that session then the list of remaining hazards. So that was key, really, that anyone receiving that area knew exactly what the remaining hazards were in that area. We also then conducted a site walk, which would sort of go and view those remaining hazards and make sure everybody was fully on board with what was needed to be done to control those.
Right, good. What industries or sectors did you identify as having best practice in decommissioning? I know you talked about Scunthorpe Visit, so you did some internal. Did you do any external benchmarking as well?
There is some. There's very little literature actually around decommissioning as a process, if you like. There was some around oil and gas, but again, when you go looking, a lot of the advice is more around CDM and demolition, really, as opposed to that initial cessation phase and how you initially achieve a sort of plant status. So yeah, I think we sort of quickly sort of narrowed it to the steel sector, and then even the framework has got a lot of guidance on there, which may only be, even within Tata, relevant for Talbot. You know, certain checklists, certain people to go and contact, and things like that. We wanted it to be more of a guidance document, really. We needed to make sure people had the right information, you know, quickly. So yeah, it was a very specific document, albeit one that I think you could take the general process and it could be replicated anywhere, really.
That's good to hear. Because we're sort of coming up against 1:30, and you've answered a lot of those questions there, so thank you very much, Richard. I'd like to go and thank everyone for attending. We had a very good turnout today, so really appreciate that. As I say, we've got a few questions that we haven't quite got round to, but I will go and send those through to Richard, and I'm sure he will kindly answer them. And then we'll go and put them up on LinkedIn so that everyone can go and see what we've gone and covered. So thank you all so much for actually attending. Thank you to Richard and the team at Tata Steel for going and actually sharing that. That's really, really helpful. I'm sure a lot of people will go away with a checklist now to go and sort of go, well, we go to Tata to go and work out how to do decommissioning. So thank you all so much, and really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Bye-bye.